Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Robert Jensen. He's an author and a professor of journalism at the University of Texas at Austin. Hi, Bob.
Hello, Sonali.
Outgoing Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel is visiting Iraq for the first time that such a high-ranking official has done so since U.S. troops officially withdrew from the country in late 2011. Hagel's trip symbolizes the return of overt U.S. involvement in Iraq with the war against Sunni rebel forces calling themselves the Islamic State. Hagel told press, "Our role has to be a support role. It is their country. They have to lead." Meanwhile, a controversial Senate intelligence report on CIA torture is expected to be released today and has ignited fears of reprisals from the Muslim world. This is how the New York Times expressed it. Quote, "A detailed account of the brutal interrogation methods used by the CIA during the George W. Bush administration could incite unrest and violence, even resulting in the deaths of Americans." The Times also noted that, quote, "The Islamic State already clads its American hostages in orange jumpsuits like those worn by prisoners in CIA interrogations." Now, Bob, we have tortured Muslims. Won't the report simply confirm what the photos from Abu Ghraib already revealed years ago?
Yes, of course. This is really more a fight about how to understand American history inside America. On the one hand, you have the more reactionary forces led by Dick Cheney saying everything we did was right and there's no reason to apologize, there's no reason to rethink because we're always right. And then on the other hand, you have the sort of centrist liberals, most often in the Democratic Party, saying, well, we have to worry about how this is going to be understood in the rest of the world. And all the time, of course, the rest of the world knows perfectly well why the invasion of Iraq happened. It holds the United States responsible for the predictable consequences of the invasion of Iraq, and also condemns and has condemned ever since the news of torture first came out. So most of what we're seeing is kind of a political charade inside the U.S. that, as far as I can tell, has no effect on how the rest of the world understands these very basic issues.
And then a new and disturbing report by the UN Children's Agency has concluded that 2014 was, quote, "a devastating year for the planet's youngest humans." UNICEF has found that as many as 15 million children are caught up in violent conflicts in the Central African Republic, Iraq, South Sudan, the state of Palestine, Syria, and Ukraine, and, quote, "an estimated 230 million children currently live in countries and areas affected by armed conflicts." Anthony Lake, UNICEF's executive director, said in a statement, quote, "Never in recent memory have so many children been subjected to such unspeakable brutality." He added, "Children have been killed while studying in the classroom and while sleeping in their beds. They have been orphaned, kidnapped, tortured, recruited, raped, and even sold as slaves." Well, Bob, as we head into the holiday season, I wonder how many of us will think of a report like this and vow to work for justice for the world's children.
Well, I think the key term in what you just quoted is, of course, unspeakable. These are crimes, horrors, so extreme that it is hard, even for those of us who want to face reality, to understand them. And of course, much of the United States population is in deep denial about these things. So I expect this will not make the news. More important, of course, than the general fate of these children is to recognize the role that our government played in creating the conditions for this kind of misery, this kind of brutality. If you look at the countries mentioned in this report, the Middle East, Syria, places where the U.S. policy, of course, is directly responsible.
And finally, a document obtained by the Los Angeles Times has found that the U.S. deported 14% fewer undocumented immigrants over the past year than usual. According to the LA Times, the decrease was recorded even as the number of people caught crossing the border rose. It is likely to give new ammunition to Republicans who accuse the administration of lax enforcement, although it could also boost the president's standing in Latino communities. The report by Immigration and Customs Enforcement documented more than 300,000 people were still removed from the U.S. Well, Bob, do these numbers indicate that President Obama may have quietly responded to the epithet deporter-in-chief that some immigrant rights groups have labeled him over the years?
Well, the news story points out that this is partly a result of policy changes, and that's all to the good. Most of us on the progressive side of the fence would see these as wholly inadequate to fixing a fundamentally immoral immigration system, but the steps that are taken are better than nothing. On the other hand, the story also points out that some of this is the result of changes in the reality on the ground, the flood of children from Central America that took some resources away deporting people to that. So it's not clear how any of all this is going to shake out over time. We can only predict one thing, and that is that the Republicans will continue to veer toward a more and more irrational approach to this that is not only immoral, but against their own political self-interest for reasons that are sometimes hard to understand.
Bob Jensen, it's always a pleasure to have you on. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Sonali.
Robert Jensen is our daily Newsflash guest expert. He's an author and a professor of journalism at the University of Texas at Austin. This is Uprising, and you can subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/uprising with Sonali. Our program is now not just a radio program, but a television program. It airs on Free Speech TV, which you can get on DirecTV, Dish Network, or Roku. And that is available at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. If you don't have cable or Roku, you can just go to youtube.com/uprising with Sonali and subscribe. This is Uprising. We'll be right back.